Good evening. I'm your host, Karen Hudis, in this series on the network of global corporate control. Today's program is about Atlantis. I'm filming this program at the end of April and 1 week after the World Bank and IMF's spring meetings. There's been a big struggle to hide reality from us, and I've been at the very center of that struggle because I'm the overseer mandate trustee of the world's wealth that was hidden from us. I'm going to take a few minutes to set the stage because it's just as important to know how this information about Atlantis was hidden as it is to learn about it. The network of global corporate control, a mega conglomerate of the 60 central banks and the Vatican and the Society of Jesus and the bloodline families, has been systematically hiding reality from us. In 1986, I was hired into the World Bank by an Egyptian lawyer named Ibrahim Shihada, who had previously been the general counsel of the Organization of Petroleum Exporting Countries. I was brought into the World Bank because I wrote a legislative history about the G77, which is 134 developing countries. 1 year after Shihada brought me into the World Bank, I was introduced to the Egyptian representative on the World Bank's board, and I've been working with the board of the World Bank ever since. The moral of this segment is the importance of critical thinking. It is critical thinking of all of humanity working together as a team that has enabled us to inherit the world's wealth, and it's going to be critical thinking that helps us in the global currency reset to avoid the pitfalls that will lead to backsliding. The people who reconstructed the history of Atlantis were all critical thinkers, and I will be introducing them to you. If you recognize some of their language in this teleprompter, that is no accident. I've been scrambling to produce this teleprompter because I've been busy defending myself from the many agents of the network of global corporate control. If there's time at the end of this session, I'm going to talk about some critical thinking that will help you figure out whether what I'm telling you makes sense or not. Going forward, it's critical thinking that will enable you to figure out whether we're remaining on track during the global currency reset. One of the people who has done most on the team that has destroyed the network of global corporate control is a Japanese journalist, Izumi Takahashi, who introduced me to the leaders in Japan. Her specialty was in teaching the strongest young minds in Japan to think critically. The World Bank and International Monetary Fund were created in order to return the world's wealth to the world's people. This is due to the greatest whistleblower of all time, Jose Rizal. In an earlier episode, we learned about Jose Rizal and how he set out to end the cruel Spanish colonial domination of the Philippines. After Rizal survived the firing squad in 1896, he went to the Vatican as Father Antonio Diaz and rose through the ranks, becoming the Superior General of the Jesuits in 1942. Between 1942 and 1946, Rizal melted the Vatican's gold in Singapore and then had his lawyer, Ferdinand Marcos, create a trust called the Global Debt Facility. When he melted the gold, he stamped it with the name of the Global Debt Facility Trust, that is TVM LSM 666. And there's been a lot of discussion about what the numbers 666 mean. That's three numbers, 600, 60, and 6. These all mean humanity. To assume ownership of this gold, along with other precious metals, gems, and art treasures, in summary, the world's patrimony. The terms of this trust were agreed in 1950 among the world's rulers in the bilateral Minesfield Breakthrough Successor Agreement. After 50 years, any previous claims over this wealth are invalid. The 188 ministers of finance and development on the Board of Governors of the World Bank and IMF must authenticate any withdrawals from the global debt facility. That means they must recognize the authority of the person who's signing. This past year, I have been busy in validating the various attempts of the International Court of Justice, Christine Lagarde, and other assorted crooks to undo Ferdinand Marcos's and José Rizal's work on behalf of humanity. Everybody in the world who understands what is going on has been helping me. Working together like this has been just as much a part of the process of liberating humanity as everything else that has gone before. In earlier sessions, we talked about the Hapgood map, which showed a map of the coast of Antarctica in the previous ice age. That was where my understanding remained until Nick Bain told me about the work at Moscow State University in the Chronologia database that reconstructs our ancient history from the network of global corporate control's systematic attempt to falsify it. Then Mike Brakey told me about how José Rizal learned about Atlantis. When Rizal was 12 and in preparation for college, at his request, his father bought José an amazing set of books which had much of the world historical information in them of the time. These books were called Universal History by Cesar Cantu. Among these books and others, Rizal also learned Dr. Fyodor Yagor, a German scientist-traveler who visited the Philippines in 1859 and 1860, which is, José was born in 1861. And later, Fyodor Yagor would write about his travels to the Philippines. The German scientist related his keen observations of the defects of Spanish colonization and his prophecy that someday Spain would lose the Philippines and that America would come to succeed her as colonizer. This is likely why José Rizal decided to teach his 12 disciples English. Mindanao, the island he was deported to, was the only one controlled by Jesuits. If Rizal planned to introduce a destructive human virus into the Holy Roman Empire, this Jesuit island was the ideal launching spot. Whether José Rizal survived the firing squad in 1896 or through one or more of his highly educated disciples, Rizal would have continued on his strategies through this Jesuit's colony. His disciples would have been all-stars inside the Jesuit system and worked their way to the top of the Holy Roman Empire over the next 50 years. José Rizal visited the great libraries and learning centers of the world, and, speaking 22 ancient and modern languages, could uncover these great secrets. We're now going to explain the ancient maps that were hidden in the Vatican archives. The ancients of Egypt, Canaan, and Atlantis were measuring and mapping the globe during the Ice Age, when there was much more rainfall in the Middle Eastern and North African regions, and then the sea level rose by a few hundred feet because of the end of the Ice Age, causing coastal megalithic city-states to be buried underwater. And these burial sites are now found off of Egypt, Lebanon, Malta, and southern Spain. That's where Atlantis was. There are also ruins in southern Japan and off northwestern and southern India. The Ice Age navigators were able to measure and thereby map the globe as evidence with the astronomically derived dimensions of the Great Pyramid of Giza, which demonstrates that the ancients measured the rate of the slow wobble of the Earth's axis against the backdrop of the constellations of the zodiac, and maps by the ancient sea kings reveal that the Ice Age navigators did accurately measure and chart the globe with marvelous accuracy. Since 2012, there are a growing number of scientists who now believe there are over 200 cities submerged under the Mediterranean Sea. And even more shocking, it occurred as late as between 2300 BC and 2100 BC. We now know the significance of the pyramids in the mapping of the planet between 3000 BC and 1500 BC. The Celtic cross is actually more than a cross. It's an archaeometer. The inventor of the ancient archaeometer was an Atlantis scientist named Atlas, and the empire of Atlantis was between 4000 BC to 1500 BC. The Atlantis coastal cities found around the world and throughout the Mediterranean were drowned under 100 to 200 feet of seawater around 2000 BC. And Crichton E.M. Miller demonstrated an ancient device before a shocked audience. They were shocked because they had all seen the Celtic cross before, but they had dismissed it as a religious icon rather than the scientific instrument that it is. Thanks to Crichton Miller's work on the Celtic cross, which is called an archaeometer, it's now a patented backup navigational device for sailing ships. We know the type of mechanical instrument with which these navigators measured the Earth, with the same function as Maui's Tanawa, the Mayan staff of power, and the Greeks' Antikythera mechanism. The working Celtic cross explains the construction of pyramids and henges supporting the possibility of transatlantic voyages by mariners from Europe to America long before Christopher Columbus. Miller's live demonstration, backed up with extensive research, proved beyond doubt that our prehistoric ancestors were capable of detailed surveying, astronomy, navigation, sophisticated mathematics, and timekeeping using the Celtic cross, which is called an archaeometer. The knowledge and wisdom were locked in stone for us to discover. This cross is not to be confused with the Christian crucifix. The older pagan Celtic cross was probably absorbed into the Christian church along with many other ideas from prehistory. We owe the church a debt of gratitude for preserving it for our children. It seems that many scientific and religious minds are locked in stone too, or we would have known of it earlier. When asked how he discovered it, he said, "Providence, diligence, and an open mind." He went on to say, "The Celtic cross is an inspiring inheritance for everyone living in a free world. Folks should have the opportunity to discover the truth about their intelligent ancestors for themselves." When asked how and when he made the discovery, he answered, "The eureka moment happened one November night in 1997. Most researchers have concentrated on how the Great Pyramid of Khufu, that's Cheops, was built and the stones were moved, but no one asks how it was designed. Everything starts somewhere, and I wanted to go to the beginning. How was the pyramid measured? All buildings need the skills of a surveyor before the architect can design the construction. The Great Pyramid is the largest and most accurately designed single building in the world, even by today's standards. I put together a surveying instrument from the simple materials that were available to the Egyptians. I came up with a handheld instrument that is capable of full spherical geometry and accurate to 3 arc minutes, which, according to Cambridge University, is the amount that the pyramid is out by in its alignments. I went on to discover that parts of this instrument were still in a sealed chamber in the pyramid, and that other parts had been removed in 1872 and now rest in the British Museum. I have reassembled them, and they work. You see, it's the principle that counts. For the next 6 years, my research revealed the Celtic cross for navigation, the stellar clock that they used, and the ability to find longitude without a mechanical clock. It's the root of our mathematics and our religions. Crichton Miller was awarded 2 British patents on this ancient, forgotten design in 2000 and again in 2001. He has had articles on archaeology printed in Ancient American, the Italian Hero magazine, and Practical Boat Owner. His work is already referenced by other researchers into ancient history. Another of the scientists who's helping us learn about hidden ancient history is Graham Hancock. Graham Hancock has publicized the submerged megalithic ruins in many parts of the world, some of them Atlantis, and he has made the proper connection between our nautical mile mapping system and the surveillance for the dimensions of the Great Pyramid of Giza, and their connection to the Hindu yugas of time, which have the same numerations. But Hancock didn't know how they did it. Another scientist is James I. Nienhuis. In their landmark book, Hamlet's Mill, authors Hertha von Dechend and Georgios de Santillana, back in the 60s, around the time that Hapgood's book came out, had the opinion that the ancients somehow were measuring the rate of precession, which even Hapgood didn't understand. And Hancock picked up on all that and established the relevance of the precession numbers to the dimensions of the Great Pyramid of Giza. Hapgood established the presence of submerged megalithic ruins in many parts of the world, then rightly saying that this mapping was ongoing during the Ice Age, which conventionally is said to have ended around 10,000 BC. But megalithic building didn't begin until around 2500 BC, so there's obviously a problem with that timeline. The Hindu Vedic literature indicates that the sea rose around 1500 BC to consume many coastal cities of the kingdoms of Kumari Kandam and Rama in the Gulf of Kutch, for instance. The ruins of the ancient Vedic city Old Dwaraka, anciently known as Kususthali, named after Kush, submerged on the old river valley of the Gomati River back when it was a strong river, but now it's just a trickle. The navigators of Kusuthali were mappers like the Egyptians, Greeks, and Atlanteans, so the mapping numbers were transliterated into their sacred time measures, the Hindu yugas of time, of the same methodology as the 12 winds maps, the surveillance of the Great Pyramid, and for the navigational wizardry of the Atlanteans based in the Gibraltar area, known to the ancient Hindus as Atala, the dominant western sea power in archaic times. The archaeometer worked. That's how this empire achieved 99.85% accuracy in mapping out the entire planet more than 40 centuries in the past. Around 1500 BC, a fragment of the Atlantis Empire, who came to be known as Phoenicans, attempted to replicate the original Great Atlantis capital on a smaller scale around 814 BC in the city of Carthage. Rome would eventually destroy Carthage over a series of wars to determine who would rule the seas of the world. And now that I've ended the prepared notes, I'd like to talk about critical thinking that I'd like to ask you to start engaging in. Every single day, I'm given notice of just what I call disinfo. People are criticizing all of the information that I'm giving you, and every day people send me emails saying, is this true, is that true, what's true? And I get a little bit frustrated by this because I would like people to start thinking for themselves. I'm not here to be the world's arbiter of what's true and what isn't true. That's not the way things are. I've had to figure these things out, and many people have seen me making mistakes. I'm not going to dwell on the mistakes, but the whole point about critical thinking is the way you do it is you try to look at consistency. One of the things that you use in critical thinking is you look at consistency over time. Is this person saying things, pointing to what they said in the past? Is this person credible? And one of the things that you can see is the documentation that I have credibly presented over the 15 years that I have been blowing the whistle on this corruption. And you can also see how, as people bring information to me, I've incorporated that so that we are actually all trying to figure out what's going on. And what happened in 2013 was I found out that the World Bank and IMF were actually created as the world's co-op to decide what would happen to the world's wealth after 50 years. And that 50-year period ended in 2005. And now we're at a point where we have got to get serious, because the way the paper currencies work is they always crash. What happened in the 300 period was the metals were taken out of the denarius, and we're now in the exact same situation now with the quantitative easing, the amount of currency that has flooded the world's commerce. There's too much currency. It's going to be it's got to be exchanged for currency that has value, and we've got to do this before it crashes. Now, I believe that enough of us know that there is this global debt facility containing the world's wealth, and that we should be able to achieve a peaceful transition without having to go through a crash. And I'm relying on the Department of Defense power transition model, which shows how the coalitions have formed. Right now, what you hear in the newspapers is that China has more gold than anyone else, and that China is now converting all of their paper currency into gold-denominated currency, and that they're not accepting Federal Reserve notes. The actual situation is that the gold of the world it's owned by this trust that's managed by 188 ministers of finance. A lot of it is located in the Philippines. I have been asking for the Department of Defense to give us an accurate inventory of this gold, and they have refused. The person who has refused is the Inspector General of the Department of Defense, John Reimer. And the situation with John Reimer is not very brilliant, because what I have done is I have gotten liens on his home. I can throw him out of his home. I've also gotten liens on the home of the Chief of Police of the District of Columbia. And I tried to record those liens in Anne Arundel County when the tax department told me that I paid the tax on the assessed value of that land. And that lien was first recorded by the Secretary of State in Maryland. And then I was told that they couldn't figure out how to calculate that tax. And I was talking to the governor's office, not Governor Hogan directly, but his officials. And I was telling him that I needed to be sure that I wasn't going to be locked out of the meetings, or we were going to go into permanent gold backwardation, and the citizens of Maryland were going to end up in FEMA camps. We had this conversation, and we spoke many times. And at the moment, where things stand is you've seen this on the Twitter account. I've tweeted many of the governors who had Twitter accounts and asked them to get involved in this situation, because the Chief of Police, Kathy Lanier, cannot lock me out of the World Bank. I have got to go back in there, and I have got to be able to deal with the global currency reset. We have got to exchange Treasury dollars for Federal Reserve notes. And as far as which Treasury dollars we're going to be exchanging, there were many Treasury dollars which are in an account of the Union Bank of Switzerland, and so far Switzerland is not allowing us to withdraw those dollars to use. We're going to have to probably print them ourselves. And so I'm in touch with people in the Mint in Texas. I've been in touch with the governor of Texas, and the other group that I've been in touch with are the adjutant generals. each of the governors has a senior military officer from the National Guard. And I've been in touch with all of the 50 adjutant generals. And I have told them that we in the United States and the people in the United States, people are looking to us. It's up to the United States now to save humanity. That's where we are. It's not just up to the adjutants general. It's up to the people who are understanding what is now the situation of humanity. We've got enough people who are using their critical thinking to realize that we're all in this situation together. Thank you for listening to another segment of the Network of Global Corporate Control. We've discussed in today's segment the remarkable efforts of humanity working together in an unbroken chain to recover our past and to forge our future. Until next week, I'm your host, Karen Hudas.